Hello everybody. It's good, I did that. It's quite interesting what Zoe was talking about, creativity, because I think in many ways what I'm going to talk about tonight is actually a logical progression of that. When Mike first had the idea of doing the meetup group, he also had this idea germinate in the back of his mind about this Made in Leigh brand. And he talked to people about manifesto and an ethos. And when we were at this meeting, I sort of raised my hand nonchalantly, trying to ingratiate myself in the proceedings, and said, I can knock up a brand. And at this particular meeting, there was an American guy sitting next to me. And he turns around to me and said, perhaps we can get together and throw a few ideas around. And I'm thinking, yeah, all right, calm yourself down, son, it's my thing. But I said, okay, well, let's see where this goes. And 5 minutes later, somebody comes up to me and says, that's Dan Rubin. And I'm like, fucking hell's Dan Rubin? So I go home and do a little bit of research and find out that he's actually really well known in the design industry. He's got about 1 million followers on Instagram and Twitter and all these things. And he's really at the top of his game. So I'm thinking, I really need to really bring something creative to this. So I'm thinking about Leigh and what I know about Leigh and who I know from Leigh. And I'm thinking, I need to find a story, because this is what I tell all my clients: when you're building a brand, you've got to find a story behind it. So I'm going to tell you about somebody today that is from this area. He was born in Hoxton in 1919, one of 13 children, and his name was Bobby. He spent his early years running around, pulling girls' hair, scrumping, generally being a bit of a little tearaway. But he had a father who was hard as a coffin now, and a mother who was even harder, so he had to avoid these beatings. And these beatings eventually had him and his brothers down to Repton Boys Boxing Club. Now, they're all very good, actually, at boxing, but Bobby was better than most. As you can see, he's got quite a lot of silverware there. On his lap, that's actually a fish slice and a fish spatula. Now, I don't quite understand what whaling the tar out of somebody and then getting rewarded with a fish spatula gets you, but there you go, there's different times, and that was it. So he was very, very good in the ring, and he actually had a good opportunity to go pro. But unfortunately, the Second World War broke out, and one minute he finds himself in the ring, and the next minute he finds himself at basic training. And then he sits there and he's thinking, he's about to be shipped out, and he marries his sweetheart, Jessie. Now, we think this is actually Southend Pier in 1939. It was just literally a month or so before he went. And then he finds himself in Europe. Oh, there's Jessie again. He finds himself in Europe, like a lot of the guys did, and he has a fairly good war in many respects. He takes a lot of missions, he's well respected, he earns some medals, and he has sort of what you would call, he's lucky. He doesn't get injured or anything like that. But unfortunately, he finds himself ending up at Dunkirk, and he's waiting for the flotilla of ships, many of the ships that actually came from this town. And he's standing there, and it's cold and it's dark, and he's in the English Channel, and he's up to his waist, and he's got a full pack on, and he's exhausted, and he's terrified, and he's holding his rifle above his head because he has to maintain the integrity of this weapon at all costs. And as soon as these boats come in, he sits there, and as he's standing there, he looks to his right, and one of his friends, his dear friends, slowly slips beneath the waves from utter exhaustion, and never comes back again. And to exercise the futility of war, as soon as he's hauled aboard this boat, they cut his pack off, dump it in the water, and they throw his weapon in, and they say, because we can get even more guys on the boat and we can get them back to Leigh. When he gets back to Leigh, he's got just a couple of days in the arms of Jessie, and then he ships out again, and this time he ends up being a desert rat. And he fights in Tobruk, and he ends up in Greece. But when he's in Tunisia, he actually gets hit by a shrapnel, and he loses an eye. He also gets a lot of shrapnel in this eye, which he doesn't actually realise until about 40 years later when he goes for a scan. And while he's recuperating from this terrible injury, he's sitting there, and he's in the middle of the desert, and he's got nothing to do, and he hears this chirping in the trees, and it's like this little parrot that's up there. So he gets a bit of bread, and he crumbles up in his hands, and he puts it out like that. And this bird comes down, and it takes a bit. Eventually, over time, it takes this bit of bread, and flies back up to its tree. And then every evening he does the same. It comes down, does it. So he can literally charm the birds from the trees. After the war, he comes home and fathers 4 children. As you can see, there's a lot of ears going on in that family. And he also gets himself a job as an upholsterer. And this is great for him because it's a really creative role for him, and he can make all these fantastic chairs. But it also gives him the opportunity, he can pilfer enough material that no member of our family will ever want for somewhere to sit. But he pilfers so much that he makes these great big chairs, and he's got his modest little council house, and he's got these great big thrones that he builds in his house, and everyone sits there and he can hold court. But he's got so much he doesn't know what to do with it. So like many guys of that generation, he builds this bar that takes up literally half the front room, and it's got the pineapple acrylic ice cube holder on the top, and it's got this beautifully upholstered leather blue trim that all goes all the way around it. But he's still got a ton of material left, and he's thinking, what can I do? The doors. So it upholsters every door in the house. And you go around there, and it's kind of like being in some sort of psychedelic, padded room. It was a little bit weird, but you know, it was just, that was the time. There was two things he never shied away from. One was a pint, and one was a scrap. And there's numerous stories. I mean, in fact, when I was researching this, any story that people would tell me inevitably ended up with somebody getting a clump. But one of my favourite stories involves him and a guy called Charlie Humbug. And this was probably around 1955, something like that. And they were walking through the streets of London, absolutely loud, some god-awful hour of the morning. And they're singing their hearts out, and inevitably they're approached by Bobby on the beat, who tells them to keep the noise down. Now Charlie's a bit lippy, and he's well known for being a bit lippy. So he turns around to the policeman and he tells him his fortune in no uncertain terms. And the whole situation is starting to escalate. And Bob's sitting there, and in his drunken stupor he's thinking, how can I calm this situation down? Oh, I know. Crack. One punch, lays the policeman out, spark on the ground. And then he thinks, well, if the policeman wakes up, what's he going to do? He's going to blow that whistle. He's going to call all his comrades. So Bob thinks, well, no, not if I nick it. Which is what he does. Bob wasn't one of the boys. He was the boy. He had a lot of friends, from the guys in the pub. His family loved him. And his friends ranged from East End gangsters to even an African warlord, which is another story in itself. This photo here, I don't know what this photo is. They could be about to put up a tent, or they could be about to beat the shit out of someone. I have no idea. But Bob was my granddad, and he died in 1993. In many ways, this whole thing has been a legacy for me of trying to create something in memory of him. On the most basic level, if you look at the tattoo that's on his arm, that blue is the same blue that I've used on the Made in Leigh logo. That's me there with him. I did that. In many ways, the best way to have a brand is to have a story, and the best stories always involve a family. And in many ways, I think what we've created here with Made in Leigh could have the potential to be a really nice family and something really nice for this town. I've got a lot out of designing this. I hope you get a lot out of something that you can use from tonight and anything else that you want to do with Made in Leigh in the future. Thanks for listening.